Guys, I want to apologize for the dark
Yeah,
office.
I
Just
can
talking
talk
about.
for a while.
Well, no, but I can't. I don't have any audio. I don't have anything to fix it. And the video,
We can use that.
maybe. I mean, but maybe. We can run with it. We can see what happens.
I'm really sorry. I thought we had.
It's not your fault. I mean, it's my fault. Forgot my mic. I got everything else, but I'm the one that left my mic. So it's fine. No worries. Let's launch. Movie.
Okay, they're not enough for other. Town Hopkins started up. I mean, so
All right.
where's the folder going? You got it over there?
Hello. 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 All right. And my camera's just stuck. Hello. Hello.
All right. Thank you very much, Stephanie, and everybody else. And it's now time for the Progressive Soapbox with Jamarl Thomas. Jamarl is getting some technical stuff sorted out. Meanwhile, you'll have to put up with me reading local announcements. I guess putting up isn't the word. Enjoy me reading some local announcements from our station. We have a lot of things going on, as you know. We have a lot of things going on this last week. I don't know if you were able to make it, but Friday was Grand March. I think there were around, oh, I don't know, I was estimating maybe between 600 and 1,000 people, depending on when you looked, who marched from the DCU area, Minnow Park, down to the City Hall. We had a couple of speakers. It wasn't designed to convince politicians, it was designed to demonstrate that there are lots of people in all age groups. I mean, it was from 2 to 80 who are concerned about the environment. And not just concerned about the environment, but the fact that our elected leaders are absolutely plumb scared to talk about it. We talk about straws and, oh, maybe you should recycle a little bit, and how many plastics can you do now? These are totally silly things. The glaciers are melted. The glaciers are water sources for hundreds of millions of people, and they're melting. What happens when those people can't get water anymore? They're going to come over here or somewhere. I mean, we're just not looking down the road. We have some really short-thinking people. I don't want to mention their names, but you can probably guess what I'm talking about. People who think they have to make a lot of money and don't really care about the next guy or the kids. Hey, let me say it. Lives long. Life is about life. Money's handy, Power is handy, but it really is not life. If you lost your focus, well, hey, back up and take a look around. Stop breathing for a while, and then see if maybe life breath is a big, big thing on your list. My list. While I work, I should say volunteer at the Work FM 93.9 WRWK. I come down here, as many people do, to help out on shows. On Sunday, you can hear Jay Tuck, Citizen Voices. He does a 3-hour stint here this Sunday, but he was off actually at that mountain, along with some people who are getting bent over the way the governor is ignoring all of the violations of all of the permits that were given to the people building that pipeline. Them as a man, even though every bit of that gas is going to go straight overseas. And then on Monday, we have Independence Day, Hope is Stephanie, 7 o'clock to 9, takes on various subjects. And those returns in the news. The kind of thing you might run into people. The coverage or talking about, oh, healthcare would cover certain stuff you needed, can't afford you. Diabetes medication, stuff, just basic stuff. Maybe you look at mental health. I mean, it's a for-profit system is out of kilter. Profit exceeds care. I mean, what's wrong with the system? Not to digress. I'm thankful the box right now, more or less. And in fact, I think I'm going to go live on Facebook. Yes, I'm seriously going to send this mic back over to the show. But I want you to know that.
How you doing today?
Well, we're all here.
Well, yeah, I was just letting you do the news during your spiel. How you doing today?
Oh, very good day. It's an exciting week. Lots of things happening.
Excellent. Guys, I want to apologize if you're having difficulty hearing me. I forgot to bring the exact mic, so I'm probably getting maybe not necessarily the best of sound. However, we're here. We're doing the radio hour. We have several shows or several topics that we want to hit to today. So let's start doing the news. This is WRWKFM. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I will be the voice that will be in your ear for the next 2 hours, give or take. Welcome to the show. So again, this is Jamarl Thomas. I am the person that will be in your ear sockets for the next 2 hours. I hope you guys have had a magnificent day. I'm not necessarily gonna say up to this point. I often say up to this point, but I'm just gonna say a magnificent day in general. This is WRWKFM, the Work 93.9 FM. And this show routinely covers politics and history and philosophy from a left wing, what will be called a progressive, even though I don't necessarily entirely like the label, the left leaning perspective of events. I want to start this off, since we're in an election year, we're in an election contest, with this notion of hope, notion of freedom, all of these big words. Right now, we are in what is called politically as an interregnum. What that means is leadership, and what constitutes leadership, is up for grabs. You had a situation where the Democratic Party lost 1,100 seats all throughout the United States, House, Senate, Supreme Court, presidency. They lost it all. And the 1,100 seats are all various houses, senates, governorships throughout the United States. The most rabid group of Republicans, and the Democratic Party could not protect us from this rabid group of Republicans and present a position, a platform that allows people to sign on to that, as opposed to, again, these knuckle dragging Republicans. My argument would be that it's less that Republicans get a rah-rah, and more so that the Democratic Party doesn't philosophically live up to what they say they are, in which case they're punished by the public for not doing so. I'm going in this in somewhat of a different direction, though. I'm asking something very basic. We are in an interregnum. Power is up for grabs. What will be the established order of things is up for grabs. And talking to people who are from the Democratic side and who are going to go to the polls and select their person, you get the opportunity, first time in your lifetime, to have people on the ballot that actually would present a vision of what it would mean to either be a Democrat, but also a vision from the standpoint of the left in regards to larger objectives, as opposed to just the basic, we're going to tweak this program to get a few more people health care, or tweak that program to make sure just a few more people. No, we're not looking for something that is incrementally a little bit better. The objective here, and for the first time in my lifetime, is something for a visionary change from the context and from a hegemonic shift in what is considered to be the left and what is considered to be the Democratic Party in the United States. For the first time in our lifetime, there's the opportunity for this to change. There's one candidate in the race that is not accepting cash before or after the primaries. And again, this is something of a shift. This is not something that we've had before. You have one candidate in the race that goes with a difference of a foreign policy objective, meaning it's Tulsi Gabbard. This says we want a difference in foreign policy from the standpoint of this country. That's not something we've had before. You have Yang, who's in the race, talking about we need to have $1,000 given to pretty much everybody. That is not something we've had before. And then you have, of course, the regular run-of-the-mill establishment corporate Democrats presenting the objectives that they've presented for the last 20 years that have, up to this point, magnificently outright failed. This is, for the first time in my lifetime, in your lifetime, the potential for something fundamentally different in the Democratic Party. What do you want the world to look like? Start there. Oftentimes you're starting, particularly if you're black or Hispanic, from a perspective of who keeps the monsters at bay, who keeps the boogeyman out of the house, who stops the goblins, the creatures, from getting in office. That is typically the way African Americans vote. That is typically the way I would think Hispanics vote. It's similar. I mean, blacks vote to a tune of 90% Democrat. Hispanics are up there also at 60, 70% Democrat. Who keeps the monsters at bay? And not just blacks and Hispanics, also just Democrats in general. Who keeps the monsters at bay? My argument here is that for the first time in your lifetime, that doesn't need to be the argument. In fact, not only does it not need to be the argument, I would argue that electability is wrapped into this notion of being able to create a vision for the population that the population can run with, and look up to these higher ideals of what it means to be the left. You get choice. That's my point. For the first time in your lifetime, you're presented with an actual, real, earnest choice. Yes, if Donald Trump wins in 2020, it's all sorts of bad. House, Senate, presidency. And let's say it this way. Trump winning in 2020 would mean that it most likely that the Democrats would lose the House. Republicans would keep the Senate. The Supreme Court will get added, maybe 2 additional members that are going to be from the standpoint of whoever Trump and the New York Times want. All sorts of bad happens if Trump wins. But think about it for the moment. For the first time in your lifetime, you're presented with choice. And it is not a choice that is separate and distinct from whether or not you can beat Trump. Electability is specific to the person to some degree, and I add to some degree, but electability is not separate and distinct from you having choice. I hope you understand what that means. Joe Biden, for the longest time, has been running on this notion that he's more electable, but when you look at the polling, the only thing he's using is polling. That doesn't necessarily bear itself out to entirely be true. And vision, and having something that the public itself can get behind, is not separate and distinct from being electable. You, as a voter, as a Democrat, as an independent, as somebody that wants something fundamentally different for this country, but for the first time in your lifetime, with choice. Make the right one. I stress, make the right one. Biden is falling apart. Let's be very honest. He got on a campaign stage and said black folks don't know how to raise their family and their kids. Warren has jumped in the polling. Sanders has moved up, at least from the previous. It depends on the polling that you're looking at. But ultimately, Biden is flaming out. The 2 leading candidates in the race are presenting to some degree vision. It's really only one, but the other one also is to some degree presenting a vision and providing a Sanders light in regards to this particular race. My point is just very basic. Look at your world. Look at your country. What do you want changed? What do you believe it can be? Do you believe that everyone can have health care? I do. Kennedy got on stage and said we're going to go to the moon when they had zero to no technology, but I'm being told by all sorts of random establishment Democrats that this is somewhat of an impossibility. This notion that everybody should be able to go to school to get an education. Again, both of these things fall under this notion of vision for the party, saying what does the party stand for, and Sanders, who's in the party, saying if I'm president, then I am what the party stands for, and what my vision of what this country could be is, by definition, if the Democratic Party, and I am head of that party, represents. You can't say that to be true now. This notion of having everybody, kids, the elderly, when they get older and they're retiring, should they be in a situation where they're struggling? My argument is no. My argument is if you're representing the Democratic Party and your goal is to say what is for the best interest of the public, what are the things that we want to be as a country, as a world, then that shouldn't be off the table considering the amount of wealth that this country generates and that those people work their entire lives to generate. On my very point is based, I'm not going to go through it, whether it's education, whether it's expansion of Social Security, either for the elderly or for people who are, let's say, injured or infirmed, whether it's the Medicare for all, whether it's a foreign policy that is not entirely interventionist. Whatever it is, whatever you want for this country to be, whatever you believe that this country could be, you are now, for the first time in your lifetime, in my lifetime, in real, honest, earnest terms, presented with choice. And it's not separate and distinct from electability. Choose wisely. This is WRWKFM. This is the work. Guys, we're looking for underwriters for this channel. This is talk radio. You don't often get the opportunity to hear voices that go necessarily against the kind of norms in regards to establishment politics. But on WRWKFM, you do get that type of dialogue and that type of conversation. We're going to open up the phone lines in the last 15 minutes of the show. So if there's something that you don't necessarily agree with what I'm saying in the course of the show, which I'm almost guaranteed in the next topic there will be, or if you want to just back up something that's being said and reinforce it, maybe it's something that I missed, feel free to call in at 804-464-1089. Again, that's 804-464-1089. And this is the Progressive Soapbox Radio Hour. Guys, I was at my clinic yesterday, and I was enamored to hear a story that came out where talking about the whistleblower issue. Ryan, have you heard about this? The whistleblower comes out and goes after Trump. It says Trump was talking to a Ukrainian and trying to force the Ukrainian government to release information about Biden's son.
Yes, I heard about that.
So I'm sitting at the clinic and I'm watching and listening to the story and I'm thinking to myself, wow, that's phenomenal. Now, what I would guarantee you, though, the people who are under my voice in the radio, what I'm saying is phenomenal is a little bit different than what you are saying is phenomenal. I'm going to give you my perspective of this. You may agree or disagree, but everything that I'm going to say here is perfectly and absolutely correct. And this is my perspective of this particular story, because they often say you shouldn't tell, you should show, and so I'm going to show you the way I perceive this. In the 2016 election, the Ukrainian government had a Democratic operative in the embassy in the United States. I said that we're in the 2016 election, and the Democratic Party, the DNC, had an operative in the Ukrainian embassy. That's true. Flat fact true. The Ukrainian embassy came out and admitted to such. This operative for the DNC was working on multiple fronts, but two main things. They wanted the president of Ukraine to mention Manafort, and in mentioning Manafort, being able to get Congress legitimately, even though it's clandestine from the standpoint of the DNC, to have investigations into Manafort. The goal of this, of course, is to hit Trump, meaning if Manafort is working for Trump, and there are all sorts of hearings because Manafort is corrupt, by extension, it extends to Trump. This was the DNC having an operative in the Ukrainian embassy trying to get an element of the Ukrainian government to talk about Manafort and to intrude in the election based on what the DNC wanted. And also, secondary, to release information talking about business dealings of Manafort in the Ukraine and the illegality of those business dealings of Manafort in the Ukraine. This is what the DNC wanted, and the DNC had an operative in the embassy to do just that. First point. Second point. Ukrainian courts have come out saying that the intrusion into U.S. politics by the Ukraine was in fact illegal. I repeat, information from the Ukraine was leaked into American politics during the 2016 election when Trump was running. The Ukrainian government and elements of the Ukrainian government released this information in order to hurt Manafort, in order to hurt Trump. The Ukrainian courts, don't take Jamarl Thomas's word for it, the Ukrainian courts came out and said this intrusion into U.S. politics was illegal by Ukrainian law. Second point, this is Joe Biden, and listen to what Joe Biden says here.
Prosecutor, and they didn't. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting $1 billion. I said, you're not getting $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, what, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
Now, for the radio audience, you might not have been able to hear that, but that's Joe Biden sitting on stage in the Council of Foreign Relations. And while he's on stage at the Council of Foreign Relations, Joe Biden is essentially saying, I told the Ukrainian prosecutor to fire, I told the Ukrainian prime minister to fire a prosecutor in the Ukraine. Now he's sitting on stage with a bunch of neocons, he's feeling himself, and he's bragging about doing this, essentially a submissive Ukrainian government. Joe Biden is talking about holding an aid package of, I think, $1 billion. Now, if you remember, this Ukrainian government had just went through a coup, or a revolution, depending on which side you're on, but more likely than not, a coup. Because the Ukrainian government had just went through this coup, it was a submissive, fledgling government that could have collapsed if it wasn't for the money of this aid package. Joe Biden is on stage, laughing and hamming it up to a bunch of other neocons, bragging about getting the Ukrainian government to fire prosecutor in the Ukraine. Now, Joe Biden is lying here in part. It is true that Joe Biden used the aid package in order to get the prosecutor to be fired in the Ukraine. It is not true that this took place over 8 hours. This was something Joe Biden is making up. I'm going to run this one more time just so you guys can hear it.
I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko. They would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting $1 billion. I said, you're not getting $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, what, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
Joe Biden, on stage, bragging to other neocons that he used an aid package to force and cajole a submissive Ukrainian government to fire the prosecutor in the Ukraine, meaning the government of the Ukraine decided to choose a prosecutor. Joe Biden, using his leverage of an aid package that the Ukrainian government needed, used this aid package to force the firing of that prosecutor. What Joe Biden didn't say to this bunch of neocons on stage that is laughing and hamming it up is that this prosecutor was looking into a company called Burisma. Now, Joe Biden's son was working at this company as an executive of this company when Joe Biden got them to fire the prosecutor. That prosecutor was looking into a company that Joe Biden's son was working for and was an executive on the board of. Let's keep going. Joe Biden's son was made an executive of that board without any experience in Ukraine or any experience in oil and gas. And he was made executive after Joe Biden got put on this case, meaning after Joe Biden became viceroy of the Ukraine for all intents and purposes, Joe Biden's son was put as an executive of the board of this company without any experience at all. And it's just so happened that Joe Biden got the prosecutor that was looking into corruption by this company, got that prosecutor fired. That's true, by the way. It's also true that the submissive government of the Ukraine that Joe Biden, a company, or that case ended. Well, there are two parts. That case either ended or that case essentially just outright stopped when that prosecutor that was looking into the case that Joe Biden's son was an executive of the board of, that case stopped. Now, what's more interesting here is that the organization that Joe Biden helped create and instantiate in Ukrainian politics also was the organization that assisted in the release of the information to Dean Manafort in the 2016 election, exactly what the operative in the DNC wanted, and exactly what the Ukrainian court said was illegal. Everything that I just told you was absolutely and entirely true. Now, in dealing with this particular thing, the Democratic Party and a whistleblower who did not hear and was not privy to apparently a conversation between Trump and whoever was in the Ukraine that Trump was talking to. But it doesn't really matter if the whistleblower was privy to this. Ultimately, Trump has come out and said that this was legit, especially last 15 minutes, especially Rudy Giuliani. Rudy Giuliani is the worst person to deal with this particular message last 15 minutes. Guys, we'll be taking calls in the last 15 minutes, so withhold your calls until then. Up to that point, the phone lines are closed. So, going back to the story, let's see, where was I? I guess a joke. Where was I? I'm sorry, I lost my place. Ron, can we take phone calls at the last 15 minutes of the show? They can be a little bit disruptive in the middle of the show. All right. So, I'm sorry, guys. I lost my place. Let's see. Where was I? I'm sorry, guys. Let's do phone calls in the last 15 minutes. They can be a bit disruptive in the middle of the show. And it's hard to kind of keep my place when those are doing that, when calls are coming in. All right, so let's get back to the thing. So Trump is supposedly pressuring the Ukrainian prime minister in order to release information to hurt Joe Biden's kid. That's what the news is saying. And the news is hitting this story head on. And their thing is, oh my God, now we found a thing to impeach Trump on. Now, lefties, right-wingers, look at the story and say, well, wait a minute. Not only did Joe Biden on stage brag of doing the exact same thing, but the Democratic Party was working with the Ukrainian government to release information to hurt Manafort, the exact same thing that the Democratic Party is saying that Trump is doing. This is the most interesting point, though. Trump, looking into this story, while it is absolutely true that there was a certain degree of self-interest in this, that he was going to use this as political fodder to hit Joe Biden with during the campaign if Joe Biden was going to win the campaign. But the reality of it is that there is a there to this story. Just because the media didn't cover the story, I covered the story months ago, but just because the media didn't cover the story doesn't necessarily mean that there's not a there to the story. My argument is that this story will end Joe Biden's campaign. I know that they think this is the thing that they're going to impeach Trump on, but the reality of it is that the more media scratches this, they're going to find that there is a there to it. CBS News reported, I didn't even know this, that not only did Joe Biden fire the prosecutor that was responsible, or that was in a company that his son was working for, and that his son had no reason to be on the corporate board and was put on the corporate board in the same month that Joe Biden was made viceroy of the Ukraine. It is also true that this took place in China also. And this was CBS News finding this out. My point is this, that the more they scratch the surface of this, mainstream media is going to find that there's a there to the story. And they're going to eat Joe Biden alive. And I think Joe Biden is terrified, and he knows it. They found that Joe Biden's kid was, as Joe Biden was working with China and in China for negotiations as vice president, that Joe Biden's son, the same Joe Biden's kid that was working and put on the company of Burisma as an executive, even though he had no experience in Ukraine, was also doing business in China while Vice President Joe Biden, or while Joe Biden was vice president, and was doing business deals to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. The CBS News point is, this is flagrant in regards to corruption and flagrant in regards to self-interest, in regards to political campaigns. Meaning, if you're going to hit Trump for this, then there's a story here about Joe Biden's kid where Joe Biden was pulling off the exact same thing. Nobody cared when this story was taking place, when Joe Biden was doing this. Nobody cared when the story was coming out showing that the Democratic Party was working with the Ukraine. Nobody cared when the DNC was working in the Ukrainian embassy and the story was released. Nobody cared that the Democratic Party was working with the Ukrainian embassy to hurt Trump in 2016. Nobody cared. Donald Trump starts to look into this, to use this as political fodder for 2016, and everybody's head explodes. If there is a there to the story, and if it is indeed true, what I've said, and everything that I've said here today is true, then how are we ignoring what took place in 2016? How are we ignoring flagrant DNC working with elements of the Ukrainian government to hurt one of the candidates? How are we ignoring that? And if you have a president in office that starts to look into this, and you have a legal system that starts to look into this, asks whether or not any illegalities took place here, whether there was an impropriety. Joe Biden's kid was making, I think it was $166,000 a month as an executive when he had no experience of being an executive. If he was making all of this money while he was on the board as an executive, while Joe Biden was made viceroy, and the prosecutor got fired, and it comes across as Joe Biden's kid was there entirely for the politics, for political reasons, how is that not illegal? And should not the current administration look into issues of corruption, even if the person who's doing so is corrupt himself? When George Bush was in office, and George Bush started a war where he ends up spending $7 trillion, gets over 1 million Iraqis killed, and creates all sorts of havoc in the region where we are in that country to this day, where all sorts of things come out, like ISIS and the destabilization of Syria, the refugees that are flooding into the EU. When Obama gets in office, why wouldn't Obama look back and say, is what George Bush, or was what George Bush was doing, illegal? And should Obama go through prosecutions if, in fact, what George Bush was doing illegal, meaning took us to war for something that was a lie? Beyond that point, if George Bush admitted to torture and torture is against our laws, should Bush be prosecuted by the incoming administration? My answer is yes. If George Bush was prosecuted by the incoming administration, it would have gave pause to any president that is coming in office and doing things that may be considered illegal. My answer is yes. I'm consistent. Why is it wrong for Trump to look back to see if what Biden was doing was indeed illegal? And if Biden, working as vice president, used his position and authority to pressure a submissive Ukrainian government and get that Ukrainian government to release information to hurt one of the political candidates, why shouldn't we look into that as a nation? I don't understand the Democratic Party screaming about this. I do get it from a political sense, but in a real sense of the terms, the reality here is that something took place that was somewhat flagrant in regards to hurting one of the campaigns with one of the parties, working with a foreign government to do so. They screamed about Trump and Russia, and you have the DNC with the Ukrainian government owning up to it and saying, yes, this was illegal by our laws, courts anyway. And the embassy in the Ukraine saying, yes, we had a DNC operative working here. You, DNC, working with a foreign government to shirk the candidates. Trump is corrupt. Trump is racist. Trump is a bigot. You could say 1,000 things that I would probably agree with you at 98% of those things about Trump. But it is also true that if one of your previous administrations was doing something that was illegal or corrupt, we should be able to look into that, just like I would think we should be able to look into it with George Bush. The whistleblower story. Joe Biden is terrified of. The reason Joe Biden is terrified of because he knows, he's aware that the moment you start scratching the surface on that story, that you will see what the DNC was doing. You'll see what Joe Biden was doing in the last campaign. And in seeing those things, Joe Biden knows that the feeding frenzy will take place with him. Meaning in order for the DNC to do impeachment, they to some degree will also have to throw Joe Biden overboard, just like they did with the comedian, I can't think of his name, but the comedian that they pitched overboard for the sexual, Al Franken, for the sexual assault things. They kicked him overboard immediately because they wanted to use this notion of Trump being a sexist and bigot and all this other stuff to hit Trump. And with Al Franken in office, it was difficult to do it. When this story, CBS, CNN, Fox News starts to scratch the surface of the story. And they start asking questions like, well, wait a minute, did the vice president use his position and authority to threaten Ukraine? Yes, he did. He's on stage bragging about it. Was there an operative in the DNC? The answer is yes, there was an operative. Did Ukraine release information to hurt Trump? Whatever you want to think of Trump, that answer is yes. And the second and the last one, was Joe Biden's son working at a company where Joe Biden got the prosecutor fired? That answer is also yes. And one more last one. Was the organization that Joe Biden helped create the organization that leaked that information about Manafort, that the courts in the Ukraine said was done so in order to affect the democratic election in the United States? That answer was also yes. Meaning, if all of these things that I said is true, which all of them are, then this is a major headache for one Joe Biden, and there will be a feeding frenzy. This is the five-finger death punch in Kill Bill. Joe Biden is still walking, but he's about to keel over. And the mainstream media that hates Trump's guts and is looking for each and any story that can take Trump down hasn't necessarily got wind of the fact yet that there is a there to the story. And that just because Trump is an ogre and Trump is horrible doesn't necessarily mean that each and everything that Trump says is entirely wrong. The reality of this is there's a there to this. And Joe Biden will take a hit for it. It's not that I think presidents are above the law. I don't. But if there's something to the story, then regardless of what I think of Trump, regardless of what I think of him, it doesn't mean I give the other guy a pass. I'm terrified of Trump winning this next election. And it still doesn't mean give Biden a pass. This is WRWK 93.9 FM, The Work. Guys, if you dig this content, you find yourself coming back to this channel, meaning radio station itself often. We're looking for underwriters on this channel. So please consider underwriting this content. Please consider helping this content out. We are WRWK FM, The Work at 93.9 FM. We are talk radio, and oftentimes you don't get a station that gives you left-leaning, progressive talk radio, and you get that in spades here. Guys, I want to make it clear. This is not a rah-rah Trump, by the way. Sometimes people misunderstand my argument of holding the Democratic Party accountable for the things that they do as a rah-rah Trump. That's not it at all. My angst in this, my problem with this, is that the impeachment proceedings of Trump only work to the benefit of Trump. Think about it for the moment. You have a president that said he was going to have big, beautiful health care for everyone, who said he was going to raise the minimum wage to $10 an hour, who said that he wasn't going to give tax cuts to people like him, who said he was going to be good for business and everything else. All of these things have proven to be a failure. Who said he wasn't going to have an interventionist foreign policy. That part has been somewhat true, even though he's at the brink of a war with Iran. In one policy position after the next, Trump has outright failed. There is no policy position from the standpoint of foreign policy that he succeeded in. All of those were failures. Farmers in Wisconsin are taking a hit because of Trump's policies. China is 3 times our population. There are a lot of people in that country that need to eat and producing things that our farmers were producing. Not anymore. My point is, across the board, Donald Trump has failed. And even on this notion of the quote-unquote economy, everybody is screaming about a recession coming up. Do you honestly believe that rate cuts will be taking place in a context where the society and the economy is doing great? They won't. The browbeating of Powell is being done so because Trump is trying to stave off a recession, and tax cuts was what Trump was trying to stave off a recession. He knows that if a recession hits during the time he's in office, he will lose. It doesn't matter who's on the Democratic side in that context. He's doing everything that he can to make sure he gets through without a recession. My point is this. With all of these factors in place, with all of this failure that Trump has done, you can make an argument maybe for the border, but that, again, the Democratic Party or the public doesn't agree with this notion of throwing people out the country when they haven't done necessarily anything wrong. Trump, by every measure, across the board, has outright, utterly, entirely, completely, without any leeway and any hedging in what I'm saying, has failed. And as opposed to hitting them on those things, the Democratic Party is going with conspiracy theories and things that don't have anything to do with the areas to which Trump has failed. Meaning, they tried to impeach him for a tweet. They tried to impeach him for being racist. They tried to impeach him for his response in Charlottesville. They tried to impeach him for ignoring justice or going around justice in this case from the standpoint of the Russia. It wasn't even trying to impeach him on the Russian meddling, because you couldn't even go with this notion that Trump was working with the Russians. That ended up being a conspiracy theory. So they tried to impeach him on infringement of justice on something that didn't exist. And now, this. It looks like they're just trying to find anything to impeach him on, which makes this look overtly political. When the reality of it is, instead of dealing with Trump and beating him in an election, you're trying to find an escape hatch to get him out of office by things other than an election. You failed. Your candidate lost. She lost the reality shows. You need to deal with that and beat him in an election to have any level of credibility in this process, as opposed to trying to find a loophole by which to get the president out. If this was taking place in the context of a Democratic president, Democrats' hair would be on fire. And I understand it took place from the standpoint of Bill Clinton, but it doesn't necessarily make it right. Instead of dealing with Trump on real things and the things that he failed on, you're looking for loopholes. And I can't back a party that is looking for a loophole as opposed to beating the president on a host of like 20 issues to which he said he was going to do and didn't do. My argument here is not a rah-rah Trump. My argument here is more so than what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And you can't look at one person and say, oh my God, that's horrible, by looking at the other person and saying we're going to give that a pass. I don't believe in selective justice. And giving Joe Biden a pass on this, we're trying to go after Trump for doing literally the exact same thing that the Democratic Party did and Joe Biden did, to me, looks like giving the gander a pass while trying to cook the goose. This is not a rah-rah Trump. This is a rah-rah for justice. This is a rah-rah for fairness under law. People sometimes mistake that. I am terrified that Trump might win in 2020. But I also believe that stuff like this will help him to do so. It's one thing if Trump is running a campaign where he has to deal with all of the issues he's failed on. It's another thing if Trump is running a campaign and can just deal with fake, phony issues like this. What I'll guarantee you is that the thing that he will be bringing up in that race, if Joe Biden makes it out of the primaries, is that Joe Biden is senile on one front. Joe Biden is racist on the other. Hypocrisy doesn't matter. And beyond that point, Joe Biden is corrupt. Listen to this. This is Joe Biden. Joe Biden comes across here as if he is terrified. And the reason that I put to you that Joe Biden is terrified here is because Joe Biden knows that what is going to come up is talking about him and his dealings while he was in office.
Like a drum, and he's using the abuse of power and every element of the presidency to try to do something to smear me. Everybody looked at this, and everybody's looked at it and said there's nothing there. Ask the right question. Here's what
Why do you think Joe Biden is doing that? You can't see this, but he's pointing his finger in the guy's face. He's scared. I've never seen a press conference where Joe Biden has acted in this way. He's pointing his finger at the guy's face. He's like, oh, you need to ask the right questions. Don't look at me. Don't look at me. Look at Trump. Look at Trump. Don't look at me. Don't look at me. That's literally this entire back and forth. Why? Because he knows at the moment you start looking at him and digging under the surface that you find a massive conflict of interest and massive red flags of corruption, be it in the Ukraine or with Biden and his son in China or with Biden and his son in Ukraine. And I suspect that there will be more. And that mainstream media was a capitalistic investment in this. Yes, they may hate Trump, but it is also a story that the previous vice president, using his influence in order to get political favors or favors in the business sense for his son, will be a main story also. And media would have no issue with going with that story, despite how much they hate Trump.
You give a whole series on that.
Yes. I mean, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's not. If Donald Trump was doing this and there was no there to it, I would be like, oh, this is a massive abuse of power. There's a problem here. But the problem is there is a there to it. I mean, if Trump is looking into this, what I honestly suspect and what Democrats should be terrified of is that this story wasn't supposed to come out yet. Trump was going to use this only for political fodder to hit Joe Biden in the campaign towards the election.
Okay.
That's all this was going to be used for. Joe Biden was going to get out of the primary, and Donald Trump was going to say, this guy is massively corrupt. Look at what he was doing in the Ukraine, and look at what he was doing from the standpoint of his son, and look at what the DNC was doing from the standpoint of releasing information to hit me.
Yeah.
He was just going to use all of this as political fodder. It just so happens that this just came out early. And the problem for Joe Biden is that there was a there to it, and that the fact that he was going to use it was for political fodder gets across, not entirely, but that there was a there to it, and he was going to use this to literally flattened Biden in the election, saying this guy's corrupt, this guy was working with his son to get favors, this guy got a prosecutor fired, he was going to use all that for political fodder. It just so happened he came out early.
Yeah.
It's a problem. There's a there. Like, what do you think about this, Ron? Because you might not have heard the story before. Like, what? Okay, so what do you think about it? Do you think? Because when I heard this, I thought to myself, well, the president or the Justice Department is perfectly fine in looking into issues that might have malfeasance in the previous election, and it would be weird if you tried to say that the president or the Justice Department or elements of the president's campaign couldn't look into what might have been malfeasance on the part of the last administration in regards to corruption or in regards to releasing information about his campaign. It's a weird perspective to me that says the president can't do that.
Well, sadly, what it says to me is that the entire process is so corrupt and broken that I sincerely hope this issue doesn't go to sleep, but we actually decide to look around under every rock where we're doing things for special favors and not doing things as public servants. We've long lost the idea of being public servants.
Yeah.
And I would love to get back to the model. I'd love to get back to the idea that you get paid nothing to serve. You serve because you care. Well, that's how we invite rich people. But we should take the get rich quick out of public office. Cantor is a good example. He went to work the day after he left early from his job. He was unseated from the primary to get $1 million a year working with the same people he was pretending to regulate. I'm not saying he was corrupt, but it sure looks funny.
He was corrupt.
Well, you might say that. But
yeah, I would definitely say that. I mean, look, the Republican Party, the Democratic Party too, both parties, 90% of the elections are won by the side with the most cash. Washington Post.
Yeah.
Don't take my word for it. And if you have a system like that where you literally, in real terms, where 90% of the people who win are from the side with the most cash, then how do you even call it an election? I mean, in real terms, you don't even have to know the policies of people. You just say which side has the most cash. And 9 times out of 10, you would be right. That's an A rating. If you're looking in, if you were in school, that would be an A paper. You don't even have to look at the policies. That should tell you something about your political institutions. 75% of the time that politicians are in office, they spend begging for cash.
Yeah.
That is also true. One of the Republicans got elected, and he was aghast that all the time he was like, well, what? I can't believe that they want me to spend this much time begging for cash. If 90% of the elections on the side are won by the most cash, and 75% of your time is spent begging for cash, what is the world view of that individual? Based on all incentives, you are a rational actor to go into that process thinking, I need to make sure I get all the money I need because that's how I win.
Yeah.
And even if you go into the process thinking, okay, I want to do good things, those good things will always be moderated by your need to get into office. Meaning, you may consider incrementalism as being the ideal way of doing things because you know you need all the cash in the world to win. You know the people who are going to give you that cash are not going to be on board for outright lefty policies. And so you may moderate how you act in the world with this notion that I can get a little bit good done while at the same token taking all sorts of cash.
Serious compromises, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the Faustian bargain that the Democrats made under Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton got in office, he went with this notion that I can get all the cash in the world, and the left will be forced to go along with me because they are terrified of what the Republican parties will do. Meaning I could be an incrementalist and be incrementally better than the other guy, and they would vote for me because rationally, incrementally better is still better. 4 is greater than 3, even if it's only by the difference of 1.
Yeah.
Meaning Democrats can be marginally better than Republicans, and they can argue and scream at the height of their lungs that marginal is the greatest that you can do. My argument is that marginal is not the greatest you could do. It might be the greatest you could do while accepting massive amounts of cash. Fair enough. But my argument is you, for the first time in your life, get the opportunity to choose a guy who's not accepting massive amounts of cash. And a viable candidate that is not accepting massive amounts of cash. And that based on any notion of electability, if Joe Biden is running with this and he's using the polls to make that assertion, then Bernie Sanders is side by side with him in those polls.
It saddens me to think that if we had an election and we put Bernie in the driver's seat, all of the corrupt people around him they would not be able to work with him.
There are no corrupt people around him.
Well, I'm talking about all the people.
Oh, you mean the Democratic Party?
The people who are currently holding in place the deflation of the middle class, the extortion of money from people for their medical conditions.
You're talking about the established order of politics of the Democratic Party.
The Republicans are way out. The Democrats are out.
Don't misunderstand me. Republicans are horrid.
Yeah.
I have no expectations of
Hey, I'm
Republicans.
a Republican. I'm just saying that.
Well, I have
Don't let
no
somebody come back to me.
I have zero expectations of Republicans. I have no belief that Republicans are going to do anything positive for my benefit at
No, I
all.
know Trump especially.
Right. So when I look at the political landscape and the argument that is typically made from the standpoint of the Democratic Party is an FDR type argument. However, they don't live up to the FDR thing.
Yeah.
And oftentimes their argument is literally just relative to the Republican Party, not necessarily an outsized vision of what they want to accomplish in general. There's a difference. Meaning, if Republicans are horrible and near a cliff, and you're the Democratic Party and you say we're going to be relative to these guys who are going to take us off of a cliff, then you are relatively falling off of a cliff also.
A little slower. Yeah.
A little slower. We're going to hit the wall at 80 miles an hour instead of 90 miles an hour.
Yeah.
You're still hitting the wall. My argument is that you shouldn't go for this notion of least worse. You should have a unified vision that you will defend and fight and that give the public this real clear perspective difference between the two parties. I have no belief that Republicans are going to do anything for my benefit. Between the two parties in our country, the Democratic Party is the one that argues that they are the left. So between the two, Republicans to be off the table. It becomes, how do you fix the Democratic Party in a way that makes this a viable party for the benefit and the interest of the working class and the poor? And right now, my argument is, if you're taking all of this cash, that you can't have it both ways. That your party is either going to cater to cash or is going to cater to pitchforks and workers. You have dollars or pitchforks. And right now, you have dollars. And my argument is that needs to fundamentally change. I don't see that changing ever in the Republican Party, even though we do have polarity shifts in regards to our politics. If that's going to change, the fight and the shift will need to take place in the Democratic Party because that is the only party that even gives voice to that notion of political difference.
It's challenge.
Does that make sense? Like, it's not, my castigation of Democrats is because I go after them because don't give voice to my issues if you're not going to live up to my issues. And if you're going to say we believe in health care as a right, okay, do you believe that in theory or practice? And if you believe it in theory, then I'm going to attack you for it because you can put policy in place to make that a reality. Medicare for All would do that. Mm-hmm. So don't give it voice if you're not going to give it action. If you're going to tell me that I don't believe that everybody, like, the agenda for Sanders is for the most part agreed upon by the nation. There may be some aspects that they think he's going too far to them.
The same thing.
Yes, right.
The nation agrees.
The nation agrees, but the Democratic Party doesn't, which is my issue. Like it's not so much that this stuff is too far to the left, because if you ask the public, do you think that people who work their entire life should get out and be persistently vulnerable, meaning elderly? They would say no. Which means, do you think we should expand Social Security? By large measure, they would say yes. Mm-hmm. Do you think that we should have health care in this country that is single payer? Now, this argument literally went from the nation saying no to the nation saying yes. The government should be involved in the process of healthcare. We've evolved. I mean, just in a very short period of time. The party has not. Meaning, a lot of the stuff that people would find productive and beneficial and that would have a great outsized effect on growing the stuff from the bottom up is stuff that the population says yes. Democrats in mass say yes. The establishment of the party, no. That's my issue. My issue is that they're attacking Trump and they're trying to find these loopholes in order to get him out of office, as opposed to attending themselves to real things that will benefit me, people like me, and by people like me, I mean of my class, not a racial thing. When I talk to my mom, and she's like, God, I hate his guts, I just want him out of office. And I asked her, if Trump is impeached, does anything in your life tangibly change? Like if Trump was impeached, or let's say they got Trump for something, would anything in your life change? Will, you get $15 an hour minimum wage? No, you won't. Meaning my uncle, who has to work a job while he is elderly and take care of his mom, meaning essentially work two jobs, as opposed to getting the $15 an hour minimum wage where he would just be paid a decent wage and he wouldn't have to work two jobs while doing that. Well, he hurts because of the policies that are allowed in regards to take place. When I have a relative that may be ill or sick, and not having an expansion of Social Security adversely affects them because they're not making what they need in order to kind of make ends meet. When I have a mom that may be ill, when I have a wife that may be ill, and don't want to go to the doctor because they don't want to pay either the copay or they don't want to pay for some kind of procedure that they may need to test. Mm-hmm. And, that stuff affects me.
Happens every day.
It happens every day. I mean, think about it for the moment. They, one of the arguments that Joe Biden made was, well, I mean, those people who negotiated their rates the union is not going to want to go for Medicare for all, seeing as they've negotiated their healthcare rates. Now, there's all sorts of problems with this argument. I mean, one,
Yeah.
I understand that the union has their contract, but what about the rest of the country? Joe Biden's healthcare plan will leave millions uncovered, meaning hundreds of thousands of people would die as a result of his plan.
I can know that, honestly.
Yeah, and beyond that point, um, right now, the UAW, who had the big beautiful healthcare, had their healthcare cut by the company that they're going back and forth against in the union. Meaning, the union workers, the UAW is striking because they're not getting the deals from GM. GM was saved by us, the people, the public themselves, and despite doing pretty good for profits, they don't necessarily want to give their workers a decent pay package. The workers have gone on strike. The company cut healthcare, meaning there are people who have like cancer, who are dealing with sick kids with cancer, that they cut the healthcare coverage of. Now, explain to me again how Medicare for all wouldn't benefit people who have supposedly contracts through their unions. If Medicare for all was in place, they wouldn't be able to use healthcare as a club by which to hit people that have cancer and other illnesses that are working for that company. I guess I'm just making the very basic point that policies that would benefit the majority of the population, and that by no means are radical, are out of kilter with what the Democratic Party wants. And my argument is this notion of trying to get Trump on of Russian meddling, him working with the Russians, which Mueller was like, yeah, Mueller shut that idea down. This notion that he was, obstruction of justice. Justice was something that didn't even take place. You're trying to get him on a technicality, this kind of ancillary charge. Or now this quote unquote whistleblower stuff. It just seems like over and over again they take political decisions to try to get him out as a loophole, as opposed to dealing with the real policy things that would benefit me and my kind, meaning of this class, greatly. And they don't want to touch that stuff because it would adversely affect their donors, and that their donors, who they depend on, 90% is chosen, the side with the most cash. They don't want to go that route because their donors will have feelings about them going that route. As evidence of that, Klobuchar. Klobuchar is a Democratic donor. Klobuchar gets on MSNBC and says, if I hear that term billionaire again, I will shut my wallet. I would no longer contribute to Democratic causes if I hear the Democratic Party talking about this notion of billionaires. Again, think about that. You have a Democratic donor who gets on TV brazenly and is comfortable enough of going on MSNBC, coming out of the shadows, and says, if you nominate a Sanders, or if you continue on this notion of moving politics to the left, I will close my purse strings. And therein I make the argument lies the problem. Republicans or Democrats, they both rely on the same thing. Plutocrats, oligarchs in our country, essentially giving them large sums of money. Investments. And getting those large sums of money and getting those investments, and when those party members, the politicians know that 90% of the side with the most cash, they listen to what those plutocrats are saying. And in their minds, we can't go too far to the left because otherwise they wouldn't give us money because it would be against the interests of the plutocrats if we went too far to the left. Logically, it makes all the sense in the world. The Democratic Party gets co-opted by the corporate class. The corporate class can make the argument to them, look, you can still be incremental by the same token if you go afoul of us. We're not going to contribute to you for straightforward reasons. If your policies are going to raise my taxes, it is not in my self-interest to go for your policies. If your policies are going to ensure that healthcare gets passed, or ensure that the amount of money that I'm going to be able to make year by year by year goes down, I'm not going to, for logical reasons, go for you. If Medicare for all is passed and we can't run commercials talking about drugs, meaning media is not going to be able to get their money from drug commercials, then from the standpoint of media and from the standpoint of the millionaires and the plutocrats in those offices, it makes all the sense in the world of we're not going to support you if your policies, democratic policies, by the way, and maybe agreed upon by the masses, is out of kilter with our interests. And because it's out of kilter with our interests, we will not give you or your party money as such. Meaning if you're a part of the Democratic Party establishment, let's say the DNC, the DSCC, the DCC, or whatever kind of Democratic thing, and you realize that you need donations in order to win. You need donations in order to even win a race. When you know that 90% of those donations go to the side with the most cash, we need to win. What are you, as a Democrat, going to do? The party itself has decided to go towards the side with the cash and try to work around the edges. It's logical. It makes all the sense in the world if that's your political tenor. And if you know that if you go too far to the left, you're not going to get those donations, what do? You attack elements on your left. You make the argument that you can't go too far to the left, that the public is not for it. But the reality of it is not the public that's not for it. It's your donors. There's a difference in those things. There's a massive difference in those things. Our politics should not be at the behest of the 1%. It should be at the behest of the rest of the United States, the 99%, the 98%. But that's not what we have. My angst, my annoyance, my anger, the reason I attack the Democratic Party, the reason I go after them so whole hog is because in order for anything substantial to change in our country, that party either need to be burned to the ground and changed, or that party needs to come to its senses. Doesn't look like it's coming to its senses, so the party needs to be burned to the ground, if necessary.
I think it's on fire now. Its pants are on fire.
Its pants are on fire, but right now they are fighting hard to keep Joe Biden, despite the fact that he's falling apart. And I would argue that Warren is the candidate that they're going to try to use to stop Sanders. Because I don't think it's going to be Biden. Honestly, Biden has, a year to go. And Biden is on stage some cases. He's not looking good. He can't remember Obama's name. He's falling apart in the polls.
It's hard to watch him.
It is brutal to watch him. He can get on stage saying blacks can't raise their kids.
Oh, that record players.
Yeah, I mean,
cable now.
He's falling apart.
Yeah.
And so even though they may be looking at Warren as like, oh gosh, he's going to raise our taxes, ultimately I think what they know is she's under the thumb of the party. And that despite her meaning a tick to the left of what is currently for the party, she has assuaged them very clearly that, look, I'm not going to do anything radical. Clinton is in my back pocket. Her and I have been working together behind the scenes, which is true. And she's been going through assuring the elements of the party of nothing radical, but I am going to move and take certain policies that may be a tick to the left. However, don't worry. And by the way, the party's not worried because Warren is going to take also this cash that I'm talking about, the dark money and everything else. She's already said she's going to take it. So I think from their standpoint, she's going to be holding to cash as much as any other candidate. So between her and Sanders, who's not taking that money and doesn't have that tether and doesn't have that thing where the top 1% is the greatest perspective that they need to hear. Or for Sanders, his aspect is, I'm listening to you because I'm getting my money from you.
Yeah.
That will not be true for Warren.
It's really sad to think, probably it was true of the first Clinton and the second Clinton for sure. They only have maybe, 5% wiggle room.
Yes.
All the things they say, they're so little and everything else.
Yes.
The big stuff is gone down the river already. And all they can do is trade off putting flowers on the coffin, you know?
So I do believe that Warren dislikes Wall Street. I think she would punch a banker in the throat if she can get away with it. Like if she was, I could, if somebody said Warren was hiding behind the parking lot of a 7-Eleven, and when a banker came through, she just hit the guy in the throat, so I was running away. I would totally believe that. I would be like, yeah, that sounds about right. Fair enough. Warren does seem to have a big bond about bankers. Right, that's her thing, right? That's her thing. And I agree with Warren on that premise, by the way. I would be like, yeah, you probably shouldn't, do that, but fair enough. I understand where you're coming from.
I won't feel sorry for him.
I won't feel sorry for him. Maybe, I agree you shouldn't do that, but fair enough. However, my issue with Warren is I don't trust her. And when you talk to Sanders supporters, their issue is the same. They don't trust her. Their thing is, you've shown a propensity in your ignoble career in Congress to be under the thumb of the party and to only be able to go as far as the party allows you to go. And also, if I'm being honest, certain degree of untrustworthiness, either in the self-identifying as Native American, saying they rigged it, and then a few days later coming back and saying they didn't rig it after the party kind of hits you on the head about it, saying, fall in line. Whether it's not supporting Sanders and then lying about it after the fact, meaning there was a secret deal between Clinton and Warren that she was going to support Clinton and not get involved into the political process of backing Sanders or not running herself. She's lied about that and has never been honest about that. There's a list of things. Even this thing of not accepting money in the campaign. That doesn't really make sense. You decide that you're not going to accept money in the primaries, but you will accept it afterwards. Is it possible that you're not accepting in the primaries because you know that the people in the primaries are suspicious of money? Meaning, if you're getting that cash, people in the primaries believe you're going to be under the thumb of the people who gave you that cash and attentive to your investors. However, you decide that you're going to take money after the primary as if the ethics of this stuff somehow magically goes away after the primaries. The truth of it is, it's not that the ethics goes away, it's that the priority goes away. Beating Trump becomes the priority after the primaries. And so you can make an argument in the primaries, I'm not going to take cash. However, after the primaries, what you do know is you're back to the argument of you have nowhere else to go. And that's an argument that lefties have been hearing going all the way back to Clinton. My argument is, why are you okay with that argument from Warren if you weren't okay with that argument from Clinton? Ultimately, Clinton, ultimately Warren has done good in this primary. Her political strategy has been on point. I can't complain from that standpoint. If you're Warren, or if you're a Warren supporter, Warren has done a good job. I'm going to stand as close to Sanders as possible while also cozying up to the Democratic establishment. The establishment ends up loving her. She ends up getting all sorts of support from the Democratic establishment, standing ovations before she even says anything. And between her and Sanders, they'll take her. And I don't even think it's even, it's one of those things of like Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King. Between the two, Malcolm X is terrifying. Because he's not under anybody's thumb in that regard. King is less so. Yeah. And King becomes even more appetizing because of how terrified they are of X. I make the same argument about Warren and Sanders. Warren is under the thumb of the party. She is, for the most part, gave her allegiance to the party and has gotten across that she is not going to be doing anything radical. Sanders is an existential threat. Even though Warren may seem a tick to the left of what they are okay with, between her and between Sanders, they will take her in spades. And I suspect, and I argue, that is what is taking place in the race. The assumption is that Biden is going to flame out. And the argument, especially from the standpoint of media that has been pushing Warren whole hog, is for the most part, that's their person. It makes sense to me. If you're looking at this political space, and you're like, one guy is going to fundamentally change America, and he's been putting out one platform that across the board, either in criminal justice, either from the standpoint of elderly, either from the standpoint of education, from the standpoint of healthcare, criminal justice, across the board, he is talking about a radical transformation of the American system. And the lefties love it. That's what they want. Even campaign finance. This notion that billionaires shouldn't be able to buy elections. This notion that billionaires shouldn't be able to buy media. Across the board, fundamental change. It scares them.
Yeah, one of the flaws in the Constitution was, everybody talked about it, they never put bars against money or corporations taking over the country. And of course, that's exactly what's happened. Corporations have taken over the country.
But I don't think they ever thought of it in these terms. Like, I don't think anybody in their wildest dreams would have thought corporations be considered a person.
Would have that much power.
Yeah, that's such a bizarre ruling. And honestly, that's not even the ruling. Like let's talk about that for a moment. So everybody knows the corporation should be corporations are people, but nobody actually looks at the ruling. Everybody just looks at the thing that's sitting on top of the ruling, which is essentially a summary of the ruling. If you look at the ruling itself, it doesn't really say that. The corporations are people too is one of those things that was written on top as a summary of that ruling. It was just kind of taken and ran with. And so you have all sorts of precedent that's built on a summary, not the ruling itself, if that makes sense. I don't have that up because I didn't necessarily plan to talk about that.
No.
But if you look at the ruling itself is a little bit different than the summary that came up with this notion of corporations are people too. I was watching a documentary on this or talk about this, and I was shocked but they're to some degree right. They ran with the summary. But think about this in real terms as a person. If you open a door for somebody, you do it because you're a person and that other person is a person and you're just being polite. Mm-hmm. If a company opens a door for you, they're going to charge you a nickel for doing so. How on earth is a corporation a person when the very basis and the reason that the corporation acts is fundamentally different than the way people function? The goal of a corporation is to maximize their profit. The goal of a person is not. The goal of a person is just to live.
Yes, if we could really find that. I think the Supreme Court was not feeling very supreme that day. They were having a bad day spiritually when they decided that corporations were people.
Well, listen to what I'm saying though. They didn't quite say that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Like that's the point I'm trying to make. That the ruling, that summary was written on top of a ruling, but the ruling itself didn't say it. They just started running with the summary. Like think about if you and I have a conversation, and I say, all right, I'm going to write down a summary of the conversation. And in the summary of the conversation, I say something like, yeah, and corporations are people too. And people say, all right, let's refer back to the ruling. And instead of looking at the ruling, they look at the summary. all right, this ruling said corporations are people too, without ever looking at the ruling. That's my point.
The whole thing is a bad dream.
Right. It becomes this thing where all sorts of precedent is built upon a summary of the ruling. And so you have like 40, 50 years of precedents that at this point you have no way of necessarily undermining because I don't think they're going to strike it down.
Sounds like a house of cards to me.
It is a house of cards.
Just waiting for someone to tell the opposite story.
Well, the question becomes whether or not the court will repudiate something that was considered precedent, which probably they won't. And then the secondary thing becomes
Not this batch of people, no.
if you're and right, and if Trump gets in office again, there are going to be 2 additional right wingers that get put on that court. Let's stop pretending that the Supreme Court is apolitical. It is a political institution. I mean, the reason why parties fight so hard for the Supreme Court is because they know that it is a political instrument. They know. I mean, otherwise, you wouldn't have this argument of, okay, we got to get the president so we can choose the Supreme Court pick.
Especially when you put people on the Supreme Court who are so vulnerable because their past lives are so questionable.
Yes.
All of a sudden, they're very dangerously capable of being blackmailed.
Yes, of being blackmailed. Also, they're there forever. And even if they don't get blackmailed, they're outright, full-blown right-wingers that care really nothing for what it says, but more so their interpretation of what it says, that it tends to be dramatically and weirdly to the right.
That's true. There were both those points seem to walk in tandem. If you have somebody who's mildly incompetent or mildly who has a poor history that you can hide, that person will be easy to manage.
Yes.
Very easy to manage.
But you don't really need to manage them. Like when Kavanaugh was put on the Supreme Court, do you think Kavanaugh was put on the court because he was manageable, or do you think he was put on the court because he's just an outright flaming right-winger?
No, I think he's manageable. I think even the flaming right-winger has a conscience. I think he's just manageable.
You think?
If you watch him, you watch the way he freaked out during his hearings. He's totally pooping in his pants, manageable.
Wait, okay. Oh, I see. You say even if he's a right winger, as a conscience.
Yeah.
So
I think he's just pooping in his pants, scared of being exposed.
now when you're saying he has a conscience, are you saying conscience in the terms of when policy or law comes up that the conscience will help push them in a particular direction in regards to his rulings?
I think a person of conscience could find it troublesome to make some of the decisions that they. I mean, how much should you pay a friend to put a baby in a cage? What would a business person say? I mean, how do you make inhuman decisions as a human? You suspend your humanity.
Right.
So if these people are human, they would add the human component, and that's the one saving grace. I think these people, being human, might accidentally slip upon a human equation that they couldn't violate.
But Trump is a person, and Trump went with a policy of putting people in cages. So
Trump isn't really a person. Trump is a social personality.
Trump is not a person?
No, he's a mirror of everything he sees. He tries to make them smile and pat him on the back. And he's a total synthetic being.
But you understand that there are plenty of right-wingers in this country that is perfectly okay with putting people in cages. They have no issue with it at all.
Sure.
So why do you believe that Kavanaugh would all of a sudden have some kind of humanity that stops him from doing that when there have been plenty of other right-wingers that have no issue with doing it?
Because if he could have told people to stuff it quietly and calmly, like Cheney wouldn't have cared. Cheney will burn babies, I'm sure. He'd be able to do that.
And Cheney's a person.
Yeah, Cheney's a person. Cheney could put people in cages. Cheney could make sure you can never stop tracking, you can never find out how it's done.
So why do you think Kavanaugh, for whatever reason...
Because he looked like he was about to lose it when he was in the hearings.
Well, that's just because they said he was raping women. I mean, they said he had a history of raping women. That's why he was losing it. What does that have to do with him being okay with not being okay with putting people in cages?
He cared about something.
Oh, I don't doubt.
Yeah.
Don't misunderstand my argument. I don't doubt that he doesn't care about something. Everybody cares about something. Yeah. I mean, Dick Cheney, John McCain was tortured. And John McCain cared about torture. John McCain didn't necessarily care about bombing and killing. He was perfectly okay. I mean, John McCain was pushing for wars that even the military came out saying, whoa, that's too far. He had no issue with Right. He had no issue with dropping bombs that would burn people alive, kill babies and everything else. He just didn't like torture because he was tortured. Dick Cheney was okay with gay marriage because his daughter was gay. All of them care about something, especially when it's specific to their own self-interest. Mm-hmm. When it is not, right-wingers tend not to care. And so they tend to be some of the most unempathetic people that I've ever come across in my life. Yeah. And so in the case of putting babies in cages, plenty of right-wingers have zero issue with it. And I guess my point is, it's not whether or not Kavanaugh cares about something. I'm pretty sure he cares about being called a rapist. My issue is whether or not he cares about babies being thrown in cages, and I don't think he does. I don't think many right wingers do at all. And their argument would be, well, they came into this country illegally, so everything is fair game. Kavanaugh, and I have no idea why you would think that Kavanaugh wouldn't also be one of those people that would act in the same way, seeing that he was chosen by Trump.
Well, I think he would, but my point is that he's so rattled by his hearings. You can tell he wasn't going to really stand up to a lot of torture in public. You couldn't ask him really embarrassing questions. He would melt down.
Yeah. But anybody would. Like if they had you on stand, and by the way, I think Kavanaugh did it. So this is not even me saying he didn't do it. I think he did it. I think he's guilty of sin. I thought he was guilty of sin from the beginning. Not all of the stories, not all, but the first one, yeah, I think he was guilty. And this book that came out showing a certain degree of malfeasance on his behalf when he was younger is probably also true. You're in college, 18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
You're at a party. You're drunk. You're wasted. And you're in a frat. You're a bit of an elitist. You have all sorts of things in your head, probably for advantage and social standing and everything else. You're drunk at a party
with a buddy who egged you on.
With your buddies who are egging you on, and you thought it was the funniest thing in the world to take your penis out and put it in a woman's face. I'm not shocked by that behavior. I've been in, have you? I mean, I was in college. I know those parties.
I didn't know those people, but I'm sure it happened.
Right. I'm not shocked by that at all. I mean, have you ever talked to jocks when they were in school? Do you remember what jocks were like when you were in school?
Yeah.
And not just jocks, elitists. You know, rich people that have a certain view of the world, a particular class. They're at a party, they're wasted, they're drunk, and he's being egged on. He thinks it's funny to take his penis out and put it in a woman's face. No, I'm not shocked. Yes, it's a deplorable behavior. It is very true. So I thought he was guilty from jump.
He seemed awfully nervous. You know?
He did. I didn't necessarily look at this process. I thought some of these other ones might be fake. And they are doing the first one no favor by coming up with fake ones if you can nail them on the first one. As for the stories that are coming out secondary in the book and everything else, yeah, that's probably also, like, I'm not shocked by the story at all. By the same token, if you were any random person and they said you raped somebody, you'd be a bit frazzled. I think it would be a weird perspective for you to just extremely and very calmly, I didn't do this. And just, I don't know anybody who would do that.
You're not a true sociopath. That's the kind of people that I think Trump is looking for in the Supreme Court. People who are not rattled.
Yeah.
People can make decisions that are totally illegal, but they don't bother to accuse themselves. That's the kind of people he wants on the court.
Yes, but I think that's the person any random Republican wants on the court. Like, I understand. Look, I get that people hate Trump. I don't like him myself. And like I said, 1,000 things bad you say about Trump, I would probably agree with 98% of them.
I wouldn't say, and he's great at what he does.
Oh, right, for what he is. A bungling failure, even in political terms.
But he's good at it.
But he's good at failing, yes. He has a certain ideology of the world. That ideology of the world has found to be lacking. Meaning, whatever your ideology is, the moment that you try to apply it to the world itself, you get to see the results of your actions based on what happens in the world. And in objective reality terms, Donald Trump's ideology of the world has been an outright failure across the board. So, you know, there's that. But despite me,
details, mere details.
Just details. But I don't necessarily like Trump. But I, at the very least, so, you know, like I said, a lot of stuff is not brought about Trump. I guess my point is dealing with this notion of everything that has been taking place. No, I don't necessarily like Trump. Yes, I think we're in the middle of an interregnum. Yes, I think we're at a point where the policy can be shifted in a way that is in the best interest of the country and not having to do this thing of saying the least worst. You have the opportunity to pick a candidate who's just better. And in this case, I think the Democrats are going with this notion that, all right, if Sanders or Warren, if Biden is going to flame out, we'll back Warren. And whatever I want to think of Warren, I do think her political strategy here has been successful. I mean, ultimately, she's found herself inching up towards Sanders while appeasing the established order of things. Now, this presents certain issue for Sanders. What does Sanders do? Sanders has opened the political space, meaning back in 2012, 2008, it would have been off the table for Medicare for all, for Social Security expansion. I mean, Obama tried to cut Social Security. This notion of college for everybody. This notion of expanding criminal justice reform. getting rid of the legality or ending the illegality of marijuana. And many of these things can be done on day one. Or at the very least, the president could take a perspective of this and a perspective of law that would allow him to do all sorts of things without Congress, meaning day one. Warren has had a really good political strategy. I am theoretically for Medicare for all, even though I'm for other things also. When you look at her bill, her medical bill, that's on her website, Medicare for all is not on it. Meaning the actual bill of Medicare for all, even though she supports it in theory. So she can get on the debate stage, she can argue full-throatedly for it, side by side with Sanders, as if they were in a foxhole. And if you were watching them, you will come away from with the perception, oh, she's also for Medicare for all. Same thing for educational expansion of Social Security. Across the board, there's one issue after the next that Warren has eased up close to Sanders on and take credit for something that she was never on board for, going back just 4 years prior. So credit where credit is due. You're in a political campaign. And within the context of that political campaign, your goal is to win. And if your goal is to win, you do everything in your power to win. And part of that is understanding the electorate to which you find yourself and even the political process to which you find yourself. She is a political insider. She, despite being a tick left to what the party wants, is something they will accept. Despite being not what plutocrats want, she at the very least won't fundamentally change the system, and as such, would be something they would be willing to accept. She has done a remarkable job, whatever you want to think of her, either in the debates in backing up Medicare for all and giving that full-throated argument, and that argument is just as good as Sanders is not, and both of them work in tandem extraordinarily well in making the argument. From the perspective of an outsider, it looks like these two are one-to-one on this issue. From the standpoint of a wealth tax, Sanders put out for a wealth tax in 2014. That didn't stop the Washington Post from coming out saying Sanders is jumping on Warren's bandwagon and pushing out a wealth tax. It's the other way around. Sanders was pushing for many of the policies that Warren has now jumped on board with. And because media loves her, they have been giving her credit as if she's the policy wonk, missing the fact that she's just signing on board to Sanders' policies without full-throatedly really believing in them. My argument is this. Despite the fact that Sanders has done a remarkable job, and despite the fact that it is showing that she's moving in the polls, a trending upward, some of the polls that mainstream media has been using are slightly dodgy. I mean, one Monmouth poll that recently came out, 70% of the people were over 50, and the overwhelming majority in the poll was white. The white demographic is Elizabeth Warren's demographic. The over 50 demographic is Biden's demographic, and Biden and Warren did amazingly well in that poll, despite the fact that those aren't Sanders demographics. But they ran that as if it was just a regular poll, no issues with the poll, and Warren is doing well. This is the thing, though. I don't doubt that Warren has done well, and I don't doubt that she's trending upward within the polling, despite some of the polls that have been used as dodgy, and despite mainstream media using some polls and ignoring others. MSNBC picks up a Fox News poll that shows Sanders going up by 8 after the last debate. They say, we don't want to use this poll, so they put that poll down and pick up a poll that shows Warren jumping and Biden stabilizing and Sanders at his worst. They said, this is the poll we want to use. They literally did this. They say, okay, we don't use these Fox News polls. Let's use this other poll that shows Sanders is not doing as well. So mainstream media has a role in this, but I still don't doubt that Warren is doing well. My issue, and I think people need to heed my warning on this, Warren is the worst case scenario. Why do I say that? I agree that Warren is a tick to the left. I agree that Warren is probably the most leftist Democrat in the race. Sanders is not really a Democrat. Warren is. She is a creature of the party. As a creature of the party, and being that she is willing to accept dark money and all this other money after the primary, for the most part, the Democratic Party realizes that she will still be under the thumb of wealth and the party, just like every other candidate that has ever run in the Democratic Party, despite being a tick further to the left. The problem is that even though liberals love a policy wonk, liberals love Warren in this sense, can she beat Trump? My issue is that people vote not for intellectual reasons. Oftentimes people vote for guttural reasons, things that dig into them, things that touch them in a particular way. When Sanders gets on stage and he gets 10,000, 15,000 people, I've been to his rallies, it feels like a love fest. It feels like despite me not knowing these people, all of us are on the same page in regards to what we want to see espoused in a larger world.
Yeah.
We're very clear on it. If you choose a Sanders, Sanders seems to do well against Trump. Biden also gets that kind of thing where people get him on a guttural level, but not necessarily on a policy level, and even give him a pass on issues of policy. Warren's claim to fame is policy. And she believes that as a policy wonk, she can get out there and just make the argument, and the argument in and of itself is sufficient to win. I'm sorry, I don't believe that. It's not. And I don't think she does well against Trump. I think the Pocahontas thing will be used to a brutal effect. You might call it racist, but the overwhelming majority of the public will look at it as funny. Republicans and even some independents will look at it as if she was trying to get a certain degree of favor based on untrustworthy proposition. Meaning, what is going to happen, and I strongly suspect what is going to happen, is that this, I don't know if you remember the scandal that just came out, where you had elements paying all sorts of money to get their kids into college. Do you remember that? Have you seen them around? Well, one woman is even going to jail for it.
Oh, yes, amazing.
What they would argue, what the Republican Party is going to say is Elizabeth Warren was self-identifying as a Native American when she wasn't. And while she was self-identifying as a Native American, she was doing so because she wanted to get some kind of favors, like some kind of affirmative action. Whether she got benefit from that or not was irrelevant. They would argue that it was what she thought, not what in fact happened. Just because she was not, or maybe didn't, get anything from that doesn't necessarily mean that she was dubious enough of a person of temperament and character that she was willing to use that to try to get advantage. They would use that as a club, whether it's true or not. And he would call her Pocahontas continuously, and he would use that as a way of identifying to right-wingers that she cannot be trusted, and she is the worst of all things that they say about people trying to take advantage of the system, trying to get advantage in the system, people who are claiming to be Native Americans or minority when they're not. Like, oh God, they would hammer her with this relentlessly. She is the worst case scenario. Liberals would turn around and say, see, we told you that she couldn't win. We told you she went too far to the left. And anything that is considered to the left will get put into the corner for another generation where they would say, we told you that she was too far to the left, and that the furthest to the left that you can go is for somebody like an Obama or a Biden or Clinton. I'm telling you, take my, you don't have to take my word for it. I guess I'm saying, as a lefty, she's the worst case scenario.
No, I take your point. I guess my thing on the horizon, right, like the Lone Ranger, I see Mother Nature tapping us on the shoulder saying, you kids done messing around?
Yes.
There's a world here, and you're going to pay attention to me, or you're going to have a lot of trouble. And don't say I didn't warn you.
But there's only one candidate in the race that is looking at Mother Nature and saying, Mother Nature, you're right.
I know, but Mother Nature's going to have the last word. That's my point. And I can't say why these public officials would rather go off with their fantasies of the world than an established reality. But that's a different show.
Well, I mean, you can see why. I mean, look, capitalism isn't real. Money isn't real. Government isn't real. None of those things are real. Those things are just thought things. They're things that are in us that we kind of just agree upon, and we agree upon it to such ferocity that they just seem real to us. They seem almost like tangible things.
Yeah, they seem tangible.
The environment is a real thing. In real terms, we're a ball hurling through space. That's a real thing. Earth.
We breathe air.
We breathe air. We need water.
Yeah.
We are a ball hurling through space. Human beings require certain things to live. Air, food, housing. We require this notion of being belonging to it. We have a certain degree of needs that are necessary for us to be human beings, and to be prosperous and successful, and to be self-accomplished human beings. Meaning, for us to be, to live up to a particular standard, and for us to be whole and complete human beings, there are certain things that we require. We're not things to ourselves. Babies would die if it didn't have certain things to help that baby when it's born. And even as an adult, food, clothing, fresh air, fresh water, a sense of belonging. You have certain things that you need and require to exist. Those things are real. Those things are just us being part and parcel of being a human being. Dollars, government, profit. Those things are just part of the game space that we exist in, and it's subordinate to the larger game space of reality. Doesn't mean that the people within the context of that game space can pretend that reality is a lesser to the model. meaning people at ExxonMobil who find out based on their scientific investigation that climate will be destabilized based on the actions of that ExxonMobil, and the executives that have a responsibility of maximizing their profit and know that if this got out, it would hurt their profits, look at this and say, well, we need to bury this report, obviously, because it would hurt our profits. Their priority is the profit, missing the fact that you have a larger structure to which is real. Our entire system is based that way, though. The entire way to which we operate ignores reality. I mean, we have homelessness, despite the fact that we have Jeff Bezos earning $50 billion. Like, I guess I'm saying we have a government, like, we pull in more money that has ever been pulled in anywhere else. We're the wealthiest country that has ever existed on the planet. We have more wealth in this country that has been generated ever. And yet, we have a situation where there are people who are literally living on the street. If you went into California, you would be shocked at the homeless scenario and the people literally living in what look like shanty towns.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be that way. That's an act of policy. That's not an act of God.
No, we invent these things.
We invent these things. We make these things work. I guess my point is, you understand why people who are within a substructure will pretend as if the larger structure isn't real if they profit and their entire identity is based on the substructure, not the larger reality. And reality may tap us on the shoulder at some point. Reality is tapping us on the shoulder right now, be it with the wildfires or the hurricanes or the flooding and all this other stuff that is taking place, and the heat, and the melting of the ice caps, and the lack of nutrition in our foods. You know, what they found out was the increased carbon that we're pumping into the atmosphere is making our plants sugar high. Oh. It would be like our plants taking in a ton of carbon, but it's like sugar because the plants are overeating. The plants are getting so much carbon that they lose a certain degree of nutrition because of the amount of carbon that they're taking in. Meaning that despite the fact that we're putting out this stuff into the atmosphere, the plants are taking a hit. Meaning our nutritional base is taking a hit. They're less nutritious. Right, it's like a candy bar. The plant becomes less nutritious because of the amount of carbon or food that we're pumping into those plants. What we're doing around the world is having consequences. Now, your thing is, why on earth would these people act in ways where the larger reality is showing consequences, whereas their local reality is not? Meaning the local reality is allowing them to profit, despite the fact that the larger reality is screaming.
Exactly.
There's only one person in the race that's dealing with that. Like, honestly, even in the natural reality of economics, meaning the people in the population taking a crap end of that, and taking a crap end of that gets rowdy and starts to agitate, meaning what they consider to be a process of waking up. Meaning Donald Trump gets put in office when Donald Trump is arguing, I'm going to take America back and I'm going to ensure that your interests, meaning you, the public, Joe Public, is going to be attended to. He's lying magnificently. Sure. But it doesn't stop him from using the argument, nor does it stop that argument from being legit. Yeah. I'm just saying this notion of a blue-collar billionaire and all this other stuff, that is a local reality based upon human beings, meaning there is also a nature to human beings that when people feel that their interest is not being seen fit, when they feel like they're being taken advantage of, when they're seeing one segment of the population getting massively rich, while they tend to be struggling, when they're seeing their jobs shift overseas, there is a natural, logical reaction that is bound to take place within the context of the public. Meaning there are all sorts of environmental things that are taking place, but human beings are also part of that nature. And the agitation and people being pissed off is a natural phenomenon based on those people being taken advantage of and those people knowing it. Yeah. All of those things are part of natural phenomena, and all of those things will find itself need to be acknowledged. And if it's not acknowledged, it will be chaos as a result. Yeah. You know, think of Trump getting elected. It's not magic. Brexit taking place. It's not magic. The party in Italy, the Five-Star Party, getting elected in Italy. It's not magic. Even Bolsonaro getting elected. None of those things are magic per se. Those things are a public getting pissed off with the ruling class and is looking to change what it sees to be corruption, malfeasance, or just outright corruption within the context of the way the established order of things have gone. And we can see that taking place in the past, and in the same way it happened in the past, it's happening now. This is a balancing effect. It's as natural can be. Yeah. The Russian Revolution didn't take place out of magic. It took place because of all the corruption from the standpoint of the Tsar, the expropriation of wealth from the standpoint of the Tsar, as opposed to everybody else being dirt poor, and sending those people into a war. Those people agitated because those people were flat, broke, poor, and that they saw that the Tsar was able to take all sorts of financing and wealth in this context. Same thing with the Yellow Vest movement in France. They are freaked out and pissed off because of what they say is outright corruption and unfairness within the context of the ruling class and established parties. Macron decided to put a fuel tax on the part of the population that was suffering the most.
Oh.
They got pissed off. Now, the Yellow Vest movement eventually became all sorts of things, but it started off with this notion of a fuel tax. Macron was going to increase gas to maybe $7 a gallon in France to augment what he wanted to have as environmental policies. He was essentially going to make the poor pay for environmental change in France.
Oh.
Like, that's astonishing. But I guess my point is, those are natural phenomena. I'm agreeing with you that the world changes. A natural phenomena takes place based on policies that have been enacted. And there will be at some point, and maybe now, nature tapping humanity on the shoulder saying, we need to have changes. My argument, though, is that in a political space where we have the opportunity to actually make those changes, for those changes to be real and substantial based on the candidate, we should do it. This is WRWK, The Work FM. Guys, we're going to be taking callers right now. So if you want to call in, the phone number is 804-464-1089. You can talk about whatever we talked about in this session, or you can talk about something else. Apparently, we have a caller. Who's on the line?
Dan calling from Florida.
This is Dan calling from Florida. What's going on, Dan?
Wait, he's not good.
Oh. This is Dan calling from Florida.
Go ahead,
Dan. What's going on?
I lost him.
Oh, okay. Well, this is WRWK. You can call in. You can talk about whatever you talked about before. Guys, we are a locally owned station, and as such, we depend on listener support in order to make this show work. If you would like to support this content, you can contact us at 804-464-1089, or you can find us on the web at WRWK, The Work FM.
I believe Dan is with us now.
Okay, Dan is with us now. What's going on, Dan?
All right, thank you.
Dan, can you hear me? I can't hear Dan.
You hear me yet? Oh, headset.
Hello, hello?
Try.
Oh, there you are, Dan. What's going on, man? Okay. Well, just let's snapshot it because we want to have other people to be able to call into the show, and my audience can't hear it, so go for it.
They can't. They can hear it.
Audience again. Yes. Demos. Yeah, just so my audience can hear it. The Workers' Family Party recently supported Warren. Now, last time around, they supported Sanders over Clinton, 87%. So media gave this a lot of airplay. Now, Sanders supporters' thing was, well, wait a minute, what was the vote tally? Because 50% of the vote goes towards who the leadership wants, and 50% goes towards the members. But understand what this means. This means that you might have, let's say, 50,000 members, and you might have, let's say, 10 people in leadership, and they're going to take 50% of the members and 50% of the leadership, despite only having very few leadership in comparison to the major electorate. So you could have a situation where, let's say, the overwhelming majority of the members, let's say like 80% of the members support Sanders, and you might have, let's say, 60% of the leadership, maybe being 10, 12 people supporting Warren, and Warren still gets the Workers' Family Party endorsement. Now, when people ask the Workers' Family Party, okay, what was the breakdown? Like, what were the number of the membership that supported one of the other candidates, and what was the number of leadership? Workers' Family Party, despite disclosing this in 2015, turns around and said, we're not going to show you those numbers. Well, wait a minute. Why aren't you showing those numbers? Well, the reality of it is they don't want to show those numbers because it's most likely that the membership supporting Sanders overwhelmingly and the leadership drag the vote to Warren. That's why they probably don't want to show those totals. And everything else that they've said up to this point has just been lying in order to deny that very particular point. Now, what you're saying, Dan, is a story that came out showing that $45,000 that Elizabeth Warren's daughter works on the board of an organization called Demos. Now, Demos ends up giving the Workers' Families Party $45,000. Now, You ask this question, well, wait a minute. It's possible that the $45,000 that the Workers' Families Party got from Damos, Warren's daughter, had anything to do with the leadership of the Workers' Families Party's dragging the vote total over to Warren. Maybe. And if they don't disclose that, does that look magnificently corrupt? Definitely. And then you find this other thing where you find that Damos, also that Warren has somebody on her own staff, like her treasurer, is also on works for Demos. Like this guy's a plutocrat. This guy was like a lobbyist. This guy was a multi-million-dollar donor for the Democratic Party, and this guy who works for Demos also, like you find both of these tethers to the Warren camp, and you ask, is this corrupt? And that answer is yes. And is there a problem with this? Is the Worker Family Party doesn't disclose it? That answer even becomes that much more so yes. And is there possibly a conflict of interest when the Workers Families Party doesn't disclose this and doesn't show this and doesn't show the tallies between the leadership and between the membership, despite showing this in 2015? The answer becomes yes. All of this looks bad.
Yeah.
Go for it. Yeah, go for it. Okay. No, you too, man. Thank you for calling in. Jamal Biz is the right email, so it is right. Um, and I think I've seen the email, but if not, I'll recheck just to make sure. I don't want to, people email me all the time, so I don't necessarily always have the opportunity to get back to me just because I'm often inundated with mails. However, I do absolutely appreciate all the emails that I get, especially yours, and I do appreciate your support, man. Definitely for calling into the show. You too. All right, so more corrupt. It's more corrupt to end an investigation. Um, I think it is more corrupt to end an investigation, which is why I think what Joe Biden did was worse. Honestly, I think the Biden thing, especially from the standpoint of what the DNC was doing, if you are going to tell me that opening up an investigation on Trump is necessary in order to determine whether or not he was working with the Russians, okay, fair enough. I think you need to have just cause to do so, but fair enough. And I've heard Democrats make this argument saying, look, just because Mueller didn't find anything doesn't necessarily mean that the investigation wasn't worth it. Well, we can agree or disagree on that, but if you're going to make that argument, then you can't make this argument to me that the DNC shouldn't be investigated over what the Ukraine or what was taking place from the standpoint of the DNC Ukraine and from the standpoint of Biden ending an investigation into a company that his son was working on. If you're going to argue the former, then you also have to be okay with an investigation into Biden um, and into the DNC over what was taking place in the 2016 election, not to mention how the Russiagate started in general. If you're going to tell me one, then me and my interests in regards to how all of this stuff started, the Ukrainian influence, was the DNC involved in working with Ukraine in order to leak information to answers? Yes. I want all this stuff to come out. And I think all this stuff should be investigated. And I do think it's worse for Biden to end an investigation in this case that was looking to issues with his son, as opposed to um, as opposed to this notion of starting one, if that makes sense. Like, I think the corruption thing is problematic in and of itself. And I think Biden is slightly freaked out on this because I think he knows that the more they scratch the surface, the more this stuff comes out. And if it's bad to withhold um, funding in one case, meaning for fledgling Ukrainian government, okay. If it's bad in this case, then it was bad in the previous case, especially when there is just cause to look into this seeing as there was a certain degree of corruption that was endemic in what the DNC and the Democratic Party and what Joe Biden has even owned up to the fact that he was doing. If you dislike it for Trump, then you should also dislike it for Biden. And I got to be honest, the selective justice argument, I'm not saying, Dan, you're making this argument. I'm just making the point that the selective justice argument of looking at one while ignoring the other falls flat to me, falls flat to a lot of lefties, and falls flat to plenty independents and pretty much every Republican. This is not going to be an argument that is going to carry the day for Trump. And I would even argue this argument works in Trump's favor when he is running in a campaign and he is using stuff like this as opposed to the items that he failed upon. As opposed to Ivanka or Nikki Haley, I don't think there's any political will to put Ivanka in as VP. Maybe Nikki Haley, but I don't think Ivanka. And I think, to be honest, I think he would, to some degree, even lose support on the Ivanka thing because Trump doesn't have a huge base of support in regards to the rest of the entirety of the population. Republicans may like him, and on very specific issues, people may agree or disagree with him. But from the standpoint of having a major amount of political will to be able to put your daughter in office, I'm skeptical of that. I don't think he can pull that off. Of course, he can try to do it, but I don't know if Pence will step aside in this context. I don't even think Trump is going to win the next election, depending upon who they put up, let alone having this choice of putting Ivanka in as VP. I don't know, Dan. I disagree with you on this. I don't think that he's going to put Ivanka in as VP. I'd be stunned if he does that.
That'd be fun.
That'd be astonishing. Maybe Nikki Haley, but that would depend on Pence stepping aside, which I don't know if Pence would do.
Does he think he'd get the women's vote?
I mean, if the Republican Party ran Nikki Haley, I think they would have a better chance of winning than if they ran Trump or Pence. I just think they would. I think it blunts notions of racism. I think it blunts notions of sexism. And the moment that you blunt those two things, what the Democratic Party has a problem of coming up with another excuse of people to vote for them. I mean, the moment that you take that identity argument away from them, what argument do they have? I mean, think about what they're arguing now. They've been arguing impeachment. They're arguing right now impeachment. They were arguing before something that wasn't even legit, meaning the conspiracy theory of Trump and Russia. And even when they ventured into this notion of, look, we need to focus on something that's for the middle class, that was only transient. I mean, the Democratic Party talked about that only for a few months before going back to this notion of Trump and Russia. And so if you take away this notion that Republicans are sexist and racist, what do they got?
The very fact that Mr. Trump is who he is.
That's true. But the moment that you take him off, let's say if he stepped down and you had somebody like Nikki Haley running. Nikki Haley is a person of color, and she's a woman. How can the Republican Party scream? She is. Yeah. How can the Republican Party, how can Democrats scream racism, which they always do, when you have a situation where the person running is a person of color and a woman? And how doesn't that blunt issues of sexism and issues of racism? Now, just because Haley is running doesn't make him, some of the people in the party any less racist or sexist. Nothing on that front changes. But the optics and the arguments that the Democratic Party likes to make of, oh, they're racist and sexist, how does that not get blunted with a Nikki Haley running?
Granted.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's often what they run on. And, it's not so much that you can't, if you come up with a unified vision for the party of what the party could be, then the issue of Nikki Haley being a woman and a person of color doesn't really matter as much if that's not what you're running on. Meaning, if you're not running on issues of identity, the fact of Nikki Haley as being a person of color and a woman doesn't matter, because that's not the argument that you're using and you're running with. However, if that is the argument that you're typically going to run with, then she would blunt the edges of those attacks. The problem here is that I don't believe that Trump is going to step down, nor do I believe that Pence will step down. I think Trump is going to run. And I think depending upon who the Democratic Party runs with would be the playbook of the Republican strategy, meaning the playbook of the Republicans would change depending on who they run. And I honestly believe that the playbook is emboldened by Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden will get hammered. I think he would lose. I also think that Warren would be derided continuously as Pocahontas. And even if you call that racist and everything else, it is effective, which is all that matters in the sense of winning. I don't think that Trump is going to step down. I don't think that Pence is going to step down. And if Pence does step down, I don't think it will be Ivanka. It may be Haley. I don't think it will be Ivanka. I think Haley helps Trump if he's running in the race. I don't think Ivanka does. That's my point is, I don't think these things happen. I think Trump is going to run. Whether Pence steps down or not, I don't know. But I don't think it will be Ivanka. I think it will be Nikki Haley. And I do think Haley will help Trump in that race, as opposed to Ivanka, who I think I don't even think helps him, I think it hurts him. So I could be wrong, but I don't think nepotism is something that the public wants, even from the standpoint of the right. And whatever you want to think of Trump, I don't necessarily, he might put his daughter in. I don't think he's that tone deaf, but we'll see. We'll see. I mean, it's only what 6, 7 months away from the standpoint of they started making elections or having elections in Iowa. And there are some people who apparently are running against Trump, who I think have zero chance.
Yeah.
By the same token, you never know. It's up for grabs. We will see. I mean, what in 6 to 8 months, we're probably going to see how the Republican Party is going to be running in the race, especially after the Democrats choose who they want in the primaries and this stuff starts to crystallize. And the further we get into the elections, I think the further the stuff is going to start crystallizing, where we'll start to see a little bit more clarity in the race.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah. But thank you, Dan, for your question. My answer was way too long-winded. I want to touch on a few quick stories before we end it. Congratulations to Tulsi Gabbard. Why am I congratulating Tulsi Gabbard? Tulsi Gabbard will be in the 4th Democratic debate. Tulsi Gabbard was held out of the 3rd Democratic debate because there weren't enough polls issued between the 2nd and the 3rd debate. Most of the polls that was around at the time, the Democratic Party weren't looking at. The Democratic Party has their own specific number of approved polls. So despite the fact that Tulsi Gabbard is doing better than many of what Democratic Party would consider top-tier candidates, meaning people like Booker, and even in one case being above Kamala Harris in her own state, these polls weren't up to snuff for the Democratic Party. Despite Tulsi Gabbard having more than the required donor number, the polls weren't out there. Meaning, Tulsi didn't get the numbers in the Democratic approved polls, despite the fact that in many of the polls that were surrounding us, many of which were better or just as good as the Democratic approved polls, showed Tulsi Gabbard having the requisite amount of support. Regardless of that, for the 3rd debate, in the 4th debate, Tulsi Gabbard will be in it. Tulsi Gabbard had reached the number of approved polls required for to be in the debates, and she's hit the donor threshold. She's been at the donor threshold for a while now. However, it was the polls. Well, the last poll that come out, the Monmouth poll, is the DNC approved poll, and that has her polling at 2%. The number required to be in the DNC debates, the 4th Democratic debate. Congratulations to Tulsi Gabbard. Also, a quick story I want to touch on before we end for the night is Brexit. What does Brexit mean? Brexit means Brexit. Up to this point, nobody knows what Brexit means. And even right now, the case has gotten a little bit weirder because the Supreme Court came out and saying that Boris Johnson's prorogation of Parliament was unlawful. You can call it illegal if you want. As you know, Boris Johnson gets the Tory vote. 90,000 people vote Boris Johnson in when Theresa May's government collapses. Boris Johnson, despite the fact that there are, 66 odd million people in the UK, Boris Johnson gets in with only 90,000 votes. Boris Johnson decides he wants to prorogue Parliament. What that means is going to the Queen and getting the Queen's permission to suspend Parliament. He does this. The Queen gives him that permission. The Queen wasn't going to not give him that permission. The Queen doesn't want to get involved in domestic politics. And so Boris Johnson prorogues Parliament. Boris Johnson is taken to court. The first court opposes it. Scottish court calls it unlawful, which means that the UK Supreme Court now has to take this case and make a determination on what it wants to do. The Supreme Court took the case, had multiple days of testimony, and today came up with a ruling slapping down what Boris Johnson was doing, saying that his reasoning and his rationale for calling for the prorogation of Parliament was a lie. Essentially, everybody with ears, with eyes, and with even brain that is even halfway connected to those ears and eyes knows that the reason that Boris Johnson prorogued Parliament was because he didn't want scrutiny over what he was doing. And not just not wanting scrutiny over what he was doing, was using a no-deal Brexit in order to threaten the EU. Meaning if Boris Johnson is to get anything out of the European Union, get the European Union to budge on this position at all, The way he was going to do so is by threatening a no-deal Brexit because he knows that the European Union does not want a no-deal Brexit. He was going to use no deal as a club to get political concessions out of the European Union. What other club do you have? Are you going to leave with any deal? Now, the Labour Party has said that they were going to force the Prime Minister to go to the European Union and beg them for an extension, something that the Prime Minister has said he was going to never do. Well, this makes that a little bit more interesting, right? Because right now, the Prime Minister has been slapped down. Prorogation of Parliament has been called null and void, meaning that Parliament will be back in session tomorrow. The prorogation by the UK Supreme Court was called illegal. Boris Johnson came out and says this was a regretful ruling and that this ruling makes a Brexit deal more unlikely. It is right, meaning the ruling is right, because the ruling makes the point that you just didn't want Parliament to scrutinize you, which is literally their job, and making the argument that there's a political solution to this, or this is a political matter, doesn't really fly, because in order for there to be a political solution, Parliament would need to be in session, and you went around Parliament to get rid of Parliament. Meaning you going to the Queen is something that doesn't include Parliament. And Parliament wasn't for this, and you put a knife in Parliament. Well, that was unlawful. Your reasoning for doing it wasn't legit. What you told the Queen wasn't true. Ergo, Parliament will be back in session tomorrow, and Parliament will be able to scrutinize what the government is doing.
And annoyed.
Yes, and very annoyed. And not just annoyed, there is no propensity in Parliament for a no-deal Brexit, which is part of the reason why Boris Johnson wanted to get rid of Parliament. Because understand what I mean by this. You're the UK, you want to leave. The European Union doesn't want to give you a sweetheart deal because other countries may decide that they also want to leave, meaning the European Union wants to some degree to make this hurt, to get across to other nations that if you leave, you're not going to get a better deal out of the European Union as you would get in the European Union. Mm-hmm. Boris Johnson has said we're leaving on October the 31st, come hell or high water. I don't care what takes place. I am not going to Parliament to ask for another extension. I am leaving hell or high water. And he got on stage and he ripped the shirt off, all of this chest hair. And he was being a gorilla man and being pretty strong in saying so. Labour and the Parliament says, by law, pass the law. Take control of Parliament from Boris Johnson, who has no governing majority at this point. Parliament is broken. And they say you will, by law, go to the European Union and shame yourself and beg, bend the knee, hat in hand, for an extension by law, by law, by law. Will Boris Johnson break the law? Will Boris Johnson do something that he said he would never do, and by law he is supposed to do? Boris Johnson's being cagey on this. Yes, we'll follow the law. No, we won't go to Parliament. How do these two things work in tandem? They don't work in tandem together, and yet he's continuously saying such. So now the court has ruled that this Parliament that he prorogued and suspended will now be back in effect, and they will be massively pissed off at Boris Johnson, and Boris Johnson has no capacity to govern because he doesn't have a majority. Parliament will be very pissed off at him.
What do they do?
Well, we don't know.
Yeah.
He could try to prorogue him again, meaning Boris Johnson will want to try to prorogue Parliament once again, because again, proroguing Parliament is not a parliamentary act. It is an act between him and the Queen, him and royalty.
Oh.
Him nixing Parliament goes around Parliament, which was the point of the judge. There is no political solution to this because Parliament is the representation of the will of the public, and by proroguing them, you get rid of their ability to have a say-so in this process.
It's odd he got this far with it.
Well, he didn't get far with it. They took him to court immediately. Like ultimately, when he did it, they took him to court immediately. It just so happened that the court case running its course just so happened. It's like if something happened in the U.S. and somebody took them to court, as they would say, we're going to take the Trump administration to court over some kind of policy. Well, it's going to go through the lower courts. It's probably going to go through appeals in the Supreme, and within the course of maybe a few days, the Supreme Court may take up the case early. But for the most part, we are talking about something where it takes a little bit of time to go through the court process.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way it was there.
Wow.
This is the fastest that it could have been where the UK Supreme Court takes up this case in order to say what Boris Johnson did was illegal. So they will be scrutinizing him. And there's no propensity for a thing. And keep in mind, Boris Johnson needed to get rid of them because two things are true at once. It is true that Parliament is the will of the public. It is true that there is no propensity for a no-deal Brexit. It is true that Boris Johnson, however, needs the no-deal Brexit in order to get political concessions to have any sort of a deal. It is also true that that level of brinksmanship could take them over the brink. Meaning all of these things are true at once. British politics is chaotic, but the ruling of today is the courts have struck down the prorogation of Parliament. Parliament will be back in session tomorrow. Guys, this is WRWK. We're about to end. I want to thank all of you for joining me tonight for this session of the Progressive Soapbox Radio Hour. That's slightly a lie. It is 2 hours, but still, let's go with this notion of the Progressive Soapbox Radio Hour. I would like to thank my comms man, Ron, for assisting me with the show and taking calls and so forth and making sure things stay on right from the standpoint of the tech. And I want to thank all of you for joining me for these 2 hours. For my YouTube audience, thank you all again for joining me. I don't get the opportunity to see what's going on from the standpoint in the chat. Maybe I'll update that for next week. But again, thank you for joining me, and I want to thank my radio audience in this area. Thank you all. You can help this content. We're listener content, WRWK 93.9 FM. This is Jamarl Thomas of the Progressive Soapbox signing off. Thanks all.
Thank you, Jamal. And let me just remind you, this is WRWK LPFM 93.9, Raw Work FM. You can find us on Facebook, and you can find us online as workfm.org. We serve Chestnut Hill and Ryville, Richmond, Blueston, and Ann Arbor, and a little bit of out of town. And in your car radio, you're going to hear us all over the place. In your house radio, maybe a little small, but you can always stream us. Not org, you'll see us streaming us live. And live shows, video, folks, back into the focus. Anyway, tapped into another mode of community information. So stay tuned, and have an extra bucket you find, send it our way. We're all volunteers. We do this for love. We have about 40 to 60 bucks a day, depending on the day. But in this world, I need to chuckle along.
That's
so send a little our way and bring it back to you in terms of good content. So there you have it. I'm going to go back to the loop now, and the loop is already in progress. Sorry if that's a little abrupt, but here goes the loop.
All right, guys, I know you can hear me. I apologize for the sound on this one. I apologize in the beginning. So if there are any weird sound issues, it's because I didn't really have a mic for the show. I'll make sure I bring it on the very next one. Wait, give me 1 second. Marcus will. Ever consider Bernie will ever fire at Warren? I don't know if Sanders will fire at Warren. At the very least, not immediately. I mean, I quibble back and forth on whether he should or not, and whether there will be a benefit to him. And I don't necessarily know if it would be a benefit to him now, but at the same token, you don't want the situation where she gets established. Right now, the polling for her is soft at best. And some of the polls that they're using have various oddities with it. Like I said, in one poll, it was like 70% of the people were whites over the age of 50. Well, that's going to skew the polling results, seeing as most of Sanders' support are coming from whites, and most of Biden's support are coming from people over the age of 50. Just me telling you that part by itself, you would pretty much know what the poll is going to show. So I don't know if he would fire at her, but at some point he needs to vet her, and he needs to show a difference between her versus him. But he can't attack her in this case. Vetting is different. Attacking, no. Showing a distinction between him and her, yes, he does need to do, especially potentially in the debates, even though I'm not quite sure how he does that without creating a certain degree of animosity with his supporters. Meaning, however he shows the difference between himself and Warren, he needs to do so in a way that don't piss off people who aren't necessarily entirely identified with her and who are still trying to figure out who they want and who's going to be the real person to back up their interests. Vetting her, showing distinction. Yes, that needs to be something that he does. How entirely he does that without alienating Warren's demographic is something I am not entirely sure of, but the answer is yes, he needs to. Attacking her, no. Vetting, yes. There's a difference. Remember to read super chats, also fix your sound. I can't fix it on this one, Marcus. I apologize, man. I will get it on the next one, though. And when I get back home tonight, I may talk about this particular story again. Josephine Pilleri. Trump is not going to war soon enough. TPTB. Time to threaten impeachment again. Well, they are not just threatening impeachment, they're going through with impeachment. What's his name came out today, John Lewis, and was on the well of Congress today calling for impeachment. This will end Joe Biden's campaign. It has to. I don't know how he withstands this. The Democratic Party can push for impeachment. Yes, you can do that. And you can attack Trump for pushing the Ukrainian government and using aid to do that. You can also do that. Whether I think it's legit or not is besides the point. You can do that. Nothing Trump did in that was illegal. Yes, you might make an argument that it was unethical. Whether or not it's unethical, however, entirely depends on whether or not it's true. If it is true that Biden was using that in order to squash a scandal or a corruption case that his son was involved in, I don't know how Biden stays in the race while them simultaneously going after Trump for it. I don't know how that works. And the moment that Trump brings this up, for example, if Trump came out at 9 o'clock after Joe Biden's bedtime, and Trump came out and said, look, the reason I was looking into this was because of the Ukrainian influence in the elections. Here's the Ukrainian government or the court saying this. Here's the Ukrainian embassy saying this. Just puts all the information out there and say, yes, I wanted to use it for political optics. Yes, the whistleblower came out too soon. But the reality of it is, this is outright and rank corruption. And my government should have the ability to look in corruption like any government should have been able to look into. And you should add the extra element of the Obama administration should have went after the Bush administration. He should attack this issue from the left, and she should hit this head on. Nothing I said here is inconsistent with what somebody like Trump would say. If you remember, Trump, on the campaign stage, attacked George Bush while Jeb Bush was on stage. He went out right after him, and that was one of the reasons that the people was for him. If Trump came on and said Obama should have prosecuted Bush, and we, in the job of government, have the role and responsibility to ensure that the acts of government are attended to, even in past administrations, that I am doing just that. Now, this is ludicrous, and Trump is lying here. There's a certain degree of hypocrisy built into this, but people lie all the time in government. When they come on and say Obama, his goal was to make sure everybody has health care, that's a lie. That's not true. When they go out and say the United States doesn't work with terrorist governments, that's also a lie. We, in pursuit of our politics, lie all the time. Meaning, Donald Trump could legitimately go out and attack Joe Biden on this very particular point. He could make this a story. He could go out and give a campaign speech, a speech to the American public on this issue. Yes, it's hypocrisy. Yes, he's doing this in order to attack Biden in the campaign. Yes, it just so happens also true. All of those things just so happen to be true at once. If you don't like it that Trump is doing it, then you shouldn't also like it when Biden was doing it. And between the two, I got to be honest, ending an investigation to me is worse, as opposed to Trump opening this up for political effect. That's just how it's it. They can go for impeachment. You can do anything you want. Whether or not that impeachment rings true or not is something different. And whether or not this is going to hurt Biden, again, is also something different. I think this will hurt Biden. And yet, they're going to go through with it. But I suspect that they're going to throw Biden overboard in order to make this stick. I could be wrong. Josephine, the Prairie Lady. Warren took $18,000 from Bain Capital. She doesn't hate Wall Street bankers as much as she says. Josephine, yes, you're right. Demos donated $45,000 to Workers' Family Party. Yes. Daughter is a chairwoman of Demos. Yes, I talked about that on the show. And many of Warren supporters are Hillary supporters. That is also true. You have a lot of people who want a woman candidate or woman president. They think it's their turn. I don't begrudge those people. People have all sorts of political reasons for wanting their candidate. My argument, though, is not for those people. My argument is for people who want political reasons or political changes in Washington. There may be some people that think you can get both, meaning that Sanders or Warren is a compromise in order to get a woman candidate who will push for some of these lefty things. People support their candidates for all sorts of reasons. I don't think Warren is to the left as much as I think people like to think she is. I do think she is a creature of the party, which means I don't necessarily trust her because, again, the party has taken a certain tact, and that tact has not been all that honest and straightforward, especially to the standpoint of lefties. And yes, a lot of Warren supporters are Hillary supporters because Warren has been working with Hillary Clinton behind the scenes, and the association between those two things, Warren didn't want aired. However, she backed Clinton, and you're going to have a lot of supporters of Clinton who are going to back Warren just out of loyalty. That's true. Very true. I will end this here. Guys, thank you all for joining the show, man. I really do appreciate it. This is an after show at this point. Like, share, subscribe. And for my listeners that are here in Richmond that can hear me on WRWK, if you know a business that may want to underwrite the content, you can contact me by email or you can contact the station itself, WRWK FM, the work. Thanks all. I'll see you all potentially later tonight, but worst come to worst, in the morning. Have a good one.